During most of my life, my family lived in a city that had a big regional hospital. I had just graduated in nursing school, and really needed the job. In 1993 I started working in this hospital as a male nurse. As I was new there, they sent me to work on night shift. I'll tell you, there are few things creepier than working night shift as a nurse in a big hospital. Every night I had to roam around the corridors, carrying stuff around for the most part, and the corridors were only half lit at night for power saving. The doctors there were really good people, and always reassured the staff and complimented us for our work. Two of the doctors there helped me a lot. For obvious reasons I'm changing their names. Dr. Sylvia was a woman in her 30s, very knowledgeable but not very friendly. One of those people that just get the damn job done. Dr. Jerry was a man on his 50s. He was very friendly and joked around pretty much the whole day. The first weird stuff I had happening to me was around 1994. I was working there by almost a year now, and the corridors didn't scare me that much anymore. The old school nurses did have some stories to tell, but they were very reluctant in telling them. I was at the nurse's room, when one of the room's lights lit up. Room 407. This would be a normal occurrence, except that this room had no patient in it. In fact, this room was in the 4th floor, and there was no one there that night. I turned it off for a second to see if it was somehow the equipment fucking up. The light flashed again. I stood up and started moving my ass to the 4th floor. I thought that maybe there was a patient there, but the other nurses somehow forgot to check him into another room. I arrived at the 4th floor and everything was dead quiet. As I approach room 407, I can see the lights inside the room are off. Upon entering the room, I heard a sound on the window. I was startled for a second, and hit the light switch as fast as I could. The room was empty. I heard a sound on the window again, like someone was trying to open it. I gathered my courage, and walked to the window. I opened the blinds, expecting to see someone or something trying to get in. Nothing. Only the outside lights were visible down the street. I backed off a bit, and then I heard the sound again. I reluctantly opened the window to check if there was something wrong on the outside. Suddenly, I feel a cold breeze pass through me from the inside of the room. I started feeling a bit sick immediately, and returned terrified to the nurse's room. I later found out that a patient had died during the morning, and apparently, the nurses before my shift didn't open the window. The older nurses always warn us about that. When someone passes, let them go and open the room's windows. It only goes downhill from here. Had other minor things happening through the rest of the year, but nothing major. These other things include hearing people and steps at night when there is no one there, and one or other object disappearing only to magically reappear days later in another room. The next major event happened in January of 1995. I was taking care of this one cancer patient. He had terminal cancer, and his state was very delicate. I was watching him the whole day, and at night, he started to grow agitated. I had seen many people dying, and knew that by his state he had 2, maybe 3 days. He began trying to talk, and grew very agitated. I made him calm down by talking to the guy. As he was asleep, I turned off the lights and left only a small lamp lighting up his room. Later, I had to go to the bathroom briefly. When I'm coming back, at the door I can hear the man moving on the bed desperately. As I look into the room, my heart almost stops. A big shadow, about 9 feet tall, is standing at the side of his bed, hunching over on top of him, like if it was watching closely. I screamed and hit the light switch. The shadow vanished, and I went trembling to try and calm down the patient. Eventually he managed to calm down, but about 3 hours later, he passed away. That was the first of the many encounters I had with what I believe is a reaper. In about September of 2000, I was on day shift, sitting at the nurse's room at around 2 p.m. Suddenly one of my co-workers rushes through the door, and tells me to come running. I tried asking what was wrong, but she just yelled at me and asked me to follow her to room 307. I stood up and started following her to the 3rd floor at full speed. Arriving there, I saw one of the other female nurses looking inside one of the rooms, while covering her mouth with her hand. As I looked into the room I felt my heart sinking. Dr. Jerry had hanged himself from the ceiling, using a telephone cord. The next days were some of the worst on the hospital. We had to mourn the loss of a friend while pretending that nothing happened, not to disturb the patient's peace. Months later the rumors started surfacing. Apparently, Dr. Jerry had forced himself on two of the female nurses. One of the nurses got pregnant and he forced her to have an abortion using meds from the hospital. The stories were very believable, since Jerry was known to get a bit touchy from time to time, even in one incident slapping the butt of one of the nurses. There was even an investigation on stolen medication. However, none of these nurses worked at the hospital at the time he died. They had left months ago. To this day I don't know what to think of that. Still, we preferred to remember him as the cheery and funny guy. For about 2 months, we keep room 307 empty and locked. The atmosphere in there wasn't the same as before. We would reallocate patients in order to avoid letting anyone sleep there. Wasn't until the next month that we realized that there was something really wrong. I was on night shift again. I was at the nurse's room, when the call light of the room 306 lights up. At the room 306 there was this young woman, about 36, recovering from a really nasty infection. As I got onto the 3rd floor, the woman was at her room's bathroom screaming and crying. I stopped her, as the other patients from the other rooms also got outside so they could see what was wrong. I took the lady out of the bathroom and back into her room, and another female nurse came to help me. However, the woman didn't want to stay at that room anymore. When we asked why, she told us the following story. She was there for 3 days already, and at night she would hear knocking on the wall coming from room 307. The problem is that room 307 was locked at the time, and no one went there for a while. That night, she said she was trying to sleep but the knockings were more frequent than ever. Sometime close to 3 a.m. the knocking got stronger and more frequent, and started coming from inside her room. That's when she called a nurse. From the time that took for me to arrive there, she said she was pulled from the bed to the ground. She stood up and ran to the bathroom, closing the door. She said she heard and felt something heavy slamming on the other side of the door as she sat in front of the door. Me and the other nurse just looked at each other. We ended up changing her room. On the next few weeks, everything went as normal. One day there was a staff meeting. Because of the renovations in another one of the hospitals we would have increased patients there. So the hospital director warned the personnel in no uncertain terms that every room was to be used. 3 days later, we were having a massive influx of patients. We finally ended up placing a patient at room 307. A young woman recovering from a surgery on the arm. As the night went on, I was waiting to see room's 307 call light go on. That didn't happen. However, late at night, rooms 306, 305, 308 and 309 call at the same time. One of my co-workers and I went rushing upstairs. As we got to the 3rd floor, we could hear a scream. The woman at the 307 was screaming and the door was closed. We tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I had to slam the door open. The woman was sitting next to the door, in sheer panic. We had to bring her downstairs so she could calm down. After a while, she told us what happened. She was trying to sleep, when she had the feeling that someone was watching her. She kept looking around the room. And she finally saw at a dark corner of the room, a dark figure, staring at her with big glowing red eyes. She stood up and tried to leave the room, but the door was locked. As she kept screaming, she could smell rotten flesh, and then we opened the door. The woman was visibly shaking, and we had to reallocate her. After this incident, we managed to force the hospital director to at least have the room blessed by a priest. And so it was done, the room was blessed. 2 days later, an old man was placed in room 307. Me and the other nurses stood at the edge of our seats the whole night. Nothing happened. Some days later the old man went back to his home. It seemed like, whatever it was, seemed to be gone now. Or so we thought. The next patient to get into the room was another woman. The woman was about 50 years old, and had done a surgery on her knee. Late at night, room 307 calls. The old woman kindly tells me to go there. I rushed upstairs. As I get there, the third floor was quiet. I get to the room and the door is open. Sitting at the bed is the old lady, her face expression looking very scared. I tried turning the light on, but there seemed to be something wrong with the light. So I managed to turn the lights of the lamp that was in the room, next to her bed. When I asked the old lady what was wrong, she pointed slowly at the bathroom door. She then tells me that she was trying to sleep when she looked at the bathroom door. She then noticed a hand, with very long and thin fingers coming out of the bathroom door, followed by another hand, as if something was going to peek by the door. And then came a head. It was red and greenish and it had wrinkled skin and it was bald. She then called us, but the thing disappeared. I walked to the bathroom slowly. As I got close to it, I could smell rotten flesh. I peeked inside the bathroom. I could swear my blood froze in that instant. Near the shower, this thing was standing up and looking at me. It had the features she described, and an abnormally large head. Its eyes were a deep crimson, and it seemed to have some hair at the side of the head, but the top was bald. I would describe it as an adult with harlequin ichthyosis. I just walked back from the bathroom, and calmly told the old woman that we were going to another room. I helped her and I locked the door behind us. All the staff believed me, as we had seen many weird things there. For the next 2 months, we avoided placing patients there, and finally convinced the director that there was something wrong there. The door for 307 was locked, and this time for good. It would take over a whole year for me to hear about room 307 again. Everything started when John, a new maintenance worker, started working there in 2003. From the beginning he asked about room 307, and why it was closed. We gave the standard answer, that the room was under risk of collapse. One day, I was at the nurse's room, and I heard a very loud scream, followed by a thump sound. I look at the corridor, and the maintenance worker was laying down at the beginning of the stairs, unconscious. After a brief recovery, we asked what happened. He explained that he was changing a lamp that was acting up at the corridor of the third floor, in front of room 307. Keep in mind that the hospital was moving locations at the time, so there was very few activity on third and fourth floors. After changing the lamp, he started climbing down the ladder and the lamp began to flash. The air went cold around him and he could smell carrion. To get another lamp he would have to pass in front of the door of 307. He started walking and the stench got a lot worse. He heard a sound from inside the room. At first, it looked like a person singing a song, then it changed for a low tune murmuring. As he was in front of the door, the next thing he heard made him feel sad, angry and terrified. From inside he could hear a very clear and familiar voice. "John," said the voice of his grandma. "John, please help me, you are the only one that can help me, please quickly." He got paralyzed out of fear. His grandma had died over 20 years ago. He started crying. Overlapping with his grandma's cries for help, he thought he could hear a faint laughter. Then he held the door handle, and as he did, his hand was seriously burnt. He fell backwards, sitting on the ground. Then the door started shaking violently and the door handle began to turn. He ran as fast as he could, and while he was nearing the first floor on the stairs, he said he felt like someone pushed him really hard. That's how he ended up at the corridor. His hand had a nasty third-degree burn. He ended up quitting the job on the spot. Almost 1 month later, and the hospital was almost entirely in the new location. Just a few people were left. I was roaming through the corridors one last time before I was moved. All the floors were pretty much empty. And when I passed through room 307 I swear I could hear a voice mumbling a song, to which I made my best to ignore. I still work at the same hospital, but now in another location. The old building is now abandoned for years. Who knows what still lurks on those corridors?